If you add a deterministic approach to life, it becomes the drum that you beat out in the streets, and that becomes the mindset of a culture. Therein lies the problem, in which where determinism is something that allows people to behave and act in a way that is not socially acceptable, but it gives them an excuse that is beyond themselves. And therein lies part of the problem on a cultural front.
And look what totalitarianism tries to do. You're wearing the same uniform, you're following orders, you're being turned into a cog in a machine. You got to think this is the leader, this is the cause. You don't believe that, you're gone. You're a little cog in a big machine and you have no personal identity. That's totalitarian tactics.
Hello and welcome to the Vinny Brusco Show podcast, episode number 465. This week's episode, I'm joined by David Lawrence, the author of Are We Really Biochemical Robots? A critique of determinism and Sam Harris's free will. So, if you want to go deep into yourself, this is the podcast for you. Enjoy.
Hey everyone, this is David Lawrence. I wrote a book called Are We Really Biochemical Robots? Welcome to the Vinny Brusco Show.
And here we go.
I didn't realize it at the time I started this quest, but it's the most important question there is. Not in the philosophical sense, but it's like, can we lead our lives and make a difference and change and be creative? If we don't have free will, we can't do any of that.
It's it's so interesting because it as much as like you take this this approach to like, yes, I can take control of my life and I am able to, lose the weight or do the thing that I want to do and create the business and be the entrepreneur, whatever it is, that so quickly gets the flames of that fire gets snuffed out when you just say, but it's all predetermined and I don't know. But then there is this sense of like relief to that too. It's very interesting.
It's the first show that I really went into something that I've wanted to expand in the book. Maybe I will, which is the idea that we can't ever know if we're determined, because by definition, we could be fooled into thinking we're determined, and we're determined on Sundays and Jewish holidays, and we wouldn't even know if it was causes or the devil or a leprechaun. Because if you're determined, if your thoughts aren't controlled by you, we will never know what's controlling us, right? We could be a matrix, it could be aliens, etc. But the thing where I went today that I haven't gone before, and I've been thinking about it, is that Karl Popper thing. What is it, if we can never know? Isn't the claim we are determinists pretty much the same as we're controlled by aliens? It's a useless, unless you're a conspiracy theorist, it's a useless conjecture. It's not science. There's no evidence for it, and we'll never know it. It's not falsifiable. So what are we talking about? Things that we can have evidence for, that have some logic? No, we're not. We're just making a statement that it's meaningless in a sense. No different than we're controlled by aliens. And I never really brought that out in the book. It's like, okay, why are we making these statements? And if we can never, ever solve the answer, and it has no meaning, actually it does have a meaning. It has a negative meaning is what I'm arguing. But it may not be a question that's very important, oddly enough. Having free will is, and that's another thing. You asked a really hard question, and I might have ducked it a little bit. You said, well, if you can't know determinism, does that mean you can't know if you have free will? That is a fucking great question. And I don't have a great answer to it. I've been struggling on that one. And so I went to the future paradigm. Because you'd think if you couldn't know one, you couldn't know the other, right? Because you could always be fooled. So if you can't know if you're determined, then how could you could always be determined. That's a possibility. So how could you ever know if your feelings of free will were real? But if you do that, then you get into this weird falsifiability. You can never know anything kind of a thing.
In that statement, there is the idea that, yeah, we're controlled by aliens or we're deterministic and we're predisposed to our entire existence. But isn't that also the same argument as God? Like, aren't you having the same conversation when you say, well, it's God, you know what I mean? Or religion, or when you throw your hands up to anything that's beyond your control,
Mhm.
essentially you're doing the same thing. It's just embodied in a different way.
Exactly. And that's why I called it in the book the causal faith, or the gospel of causation. I use those terms a lot because there's nothing logical or empirical that can give us any evidence that we're determined. So it's a faith. It's a faith-based doctrine, as I say. It's no different than any other doctrine that's faith-based.
And you're saying free will is not faith-based, or it is also faith-based?
Oh, that's an interesting question. That's really the question we were talking about a moment ago. It's not faith-based in the sense that we that's our living life experience. It's the most important and closest experience to us, and everything we do ratifies it. And you could say, well, all of that's been determined by aliens. Okay, well, what do you have as evidence? You have a daily experience, and you have a conjecture about aliens. Noam Chomsky was talking the other day, and he likes to cite Bertrand Russell for the fact that the most immediate evidence we have, the most important evidence we have, is the immediacy of something. And he's saying, well, we have the immediacy of consciousness and free will and so forth. We don't even know what matter is. Speaking of what causation is supposed to play out on, we've lost the sense of matter a long time ago, as he talks about. With that's Pierre, if anybody wants to know. He does have a will. He's not determined. He definitely speaks his mind. Pierre, you're gonna have to wait. We don't know what matter is, and it goes back to our conversation about quantum mechanics. We didn't get into this aspect of it, but what is matter? Chomsky was saying we don't even know what an atom is anymore. You know, we don't know what we know a lot about how it behaves. We don't know what it is. Is it a vibration in a field of quantum energy? We have no idea what it is. We just know how it behaves. You know, quantum science is so weird that what is reality has been divorced from behavior. And we could say how things behave, but we can't say what's behind them anymore.
But can't we say the same? Isn't that a perfect, beautiful metaphor for us as well? Like, we know what we are in this biological sense, right? And we know what we are in a lot of ways, but at the end of the day, and again, maybe this is just me, at the end of the day, do we really actually know what we are, where we came from, or what our purpose is, right? Or what we're doing here? That's the age-old question, is like, why are we even here, right? That's what, so many people have pontificated forever. It's I think one of the root thoughts that humans have is, why are we here? And whether it be expressed in a job or in a family or whatever capacity, there is this sense of, why am I here? Why am I doing this thing? And just to go back on the idea of free will being a philosophy of faith, yes, but then it is in the sense that the next thing that you do is unknown and you're moving towards it in faith, whereas determinism can be perceived as a philosophy of faith based on the fact that you have faith in the fact that something is already going to unravel, and in either capacity you don't know what that next thing is. So that's the faith component.
Yes, the difference is, though, is that when you're a determinist and you say everything is going to go forward and it's all fated and so forth, you can't even say that, because that thought was put into your head by the forces that control your thoughts. Alien, Matrix, Morpheus, leprechauns, indigestion, whatever you want to think it is.
Right.
You're saying that you can't know that. And you can never know if it's really true, because you might be making a mistake or you might be controlled by an alien. So there's a big difference in saying a determinist saying that everything is determined and that's my faith, though we can never know, and the free will person saying that, because the free will advocate isn't making a contradictory statement.
Yeah.
May not be able to prove it, but he's not saying, I'm saying this because it's determined. He could be wrong, theoretically, but it's not a contradictory statement. The determinist who's claiming we are determined is saying something that cannot be said if we are determined, because he could never know it. Does that make sense?
It does, but what comes up for me is the fact that the again, it's the reverse engineering of the statement that's being said, and that going back to, well, it's predetermined prior to me even being able to say it, and the free will capacity being, yes, you have the choice to make that decision or that thought or that movement towards something you're looking for, but in the unraveling of that, there still is a unknown that you're trying to answer with this terminology that we're just calling free will.
Well, that's right, in the sense that there is an unknown always in the free will scenario. It's not absolute. There's all kinds of unknowns. We were talking earlier about just writing a sentence. God, I can't remember what's that next sentence. I kind of want to say this, or out of the void, the perfect sentence or half perfect sentence pops up and you go, there it is. How did that happen? Where did it come from? It is a mystery. A lot of life is mystery, but that doesn't mean that when now you have it and you're saying, I don't like it. I'm going to change this word. I'm going to use that. No, it doesn't quite give the sense I want. Now you're thinking in a thinking process that isn't channeling, whatever it may be, to use the word channeling for lack of a better word. And that's a constant mystery in all of this free will process, is that you're constantly in touch with something that is unknown and can't be defined. You don't know where it is. You don't know what kind of dimension it is. And it's like you're interfacing with it all the time. What should I do? Let me think. Oh, yes. Okay, that. And there's decision in there, and there's appealing to an unknown part of us that's in there. It's a real mystery.
It is, and
But
it's uncomfortable. There's a discomfort element there that I think gets soothed with the deterministic mindset.
I think you could look at it that way. You could, but there's other problems with that mindset, which is taking away your freedom and your authority, and reducing you to a victim. But artists are comfortable with it. They're appealing to the unknown all the time. You know, the story that Paul McCartney tells about how he wrote yesterday. He didn't write yesterday. And it came into him, his head. He woke up with it from a dream, and he ran around asking everybody, hey, have you heard this melody before? I know I've heard it before, but I can't locate it. And everybody said, no, no such thing. He finally realized that he wrote it. Well, that's really no different than sitting and writing a song. You know, things are popping up and ideas are popping up, but they're also being manipulated and changed and judged. So it's a real mystery. I mean, it's like we're communing all the time with something that's we don't understand what it is. But that's okay, because the biggest cosmic questions in life can't be answered. I mean, science it can't answer how the universe began, whether there was anything before it, why it's expanding, why there's a conflict between relativity theory and quantum science that can't be reconciled. They just conflict with each other. The nature of consciousness, how consciousness came out of life. How did consciousness emerge from life? We don't have a clue. How did life emerge from matter? We don't have a clue. So when you think about it in the context of most of these fundamental cosmic mysteries are just a huge, vast swath of unknown at this point in time. You know, it's free will is just another one of those mysteries, in the sense that it's communing with this other entangled force, if I can use a word, that's very mysterious. Artists like it. Artists are looking at it all the time because they're invoking things to bubble up. And rational people and scientists and intellectuals are sort of calling upon the other thinking process aspect of ourselves.
But I think that you need, and you see that duality of existence in all elements, whether it be in the quantum field, as you just stated, or you see it in nature, or you see it in human consciousness. There is, as we stated earlier, this yin and yang allure to life. And in order, maybe the answer is that in order to answer those scientific questions, you need to think abstractly, and to fine tune those abstract thoughts, you need to add a scientific tuning to it.
Mm-hmm. No, it's one of Einstein's famous insights was I think when he was a kid, I can't remember how old, and he imagined himself running alongside of a light beam, you know, and his insights came from that. Well, where did that come from? And spun out a whole theory, but it was an image that came to his brain one day, him running along the top, you know, beside at the top of a light beam.
Yeah, the children have all the answers. That's what I'm going to ask mine about. I'll ask them what they think about it. I'm not going to, because I think it's going to blow their minds.
I don't know how old he was. He might have been 11 or 8. I just don't remember, but it was an inspiring image.
Eight seems to be the age where my daughter's 8, and I see the external world starting to have its effect on the way she interfaces with it. I see her being affected by, whether it be culture, school, teachers, her parents, her brother, whatever it is. There is now this implementation and expression of culture that up until this age I haven't really seen. And in my son, I don't see it at all. You see how quickly children rebound, or they shift, or they go strictly to what they want, and they express that from a very authentic place. I jokingly say to my daughter all the time, like, you can't mess with your brother. I call it poking the bear. I said, because he's pure testosterone. He's not filtered. He hasn't been out in culture to dumb down those innate ways of being. So when you poke the bear is going to poke back in a different way. So there's this natural element to him that's so raw and unfiltered that you almost hate to confine to social norms and expectations. And that's where the psychology of the ego and all these things come into play. But you almost hate to see it get perverted and diluted and extrapolated from them.
There's a lot of people like that on the highways in California, especially Los Angeles. Pure testosterone, and you don't want to poke them.
Yeah.
But seriously, I know what you mean. It's an interesting thought that you have about there's just something that's primal in sort of a very awe-inspiring way.
Right. And innocent too.
You don't want to see that dissipate.
And it's not only primal. That's the one end of it, for sure, the primal element, no question. But there is this genuine, authentic love capacity that is also there. And you see the well of love that a human being is capable of without any of the cultural effects on it. It's just love. It's just, there is this purity to it that's also, there's the wild animal in him, no question, but there's also the balance of that, which is just this pure love of life and of experiences and of a novelty that he's going through every day. And whether it be a puddle or bugs or whatever it is, there is this love of life that is just, you can't, if you could bottle it and sell it, you'd be the richest man in the world.
That's great. I'll bet most parents don't see it the way you do. I'm sure they do to some degree, but it sounds like you're really into a very healthy way of embracing, what he's teaching.
It's not all the time. Trust me, it's not all the time. But
sometimes you do want to punch that testosterone.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
and it's definitely not all the time, and I'm not going to pretend like it is. But the moments that it's not, I realize it's never about him. It's always about my relationship with what's transpiring or what's outside the confines of this relationship. Like, we need to get to school or be on time, or I'm going to be late to work. It's never actually about what he's doing or what she's doing. It's always about my relationship with what's surrounding it.
So what are you going to ask him about free will tomorrow?
I
Should
think
we?
yeah,
Why don't you take the first chapter of my book where I have all those key questions and go with it?
fire away on the way to school, and then she'll get to school and ask all these questions to a teacher. And the teacher like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" This is
So
second
what does
grade.
quantum science say about free will? What's his name?
My son's Vincent as well. He's
Vincent.
3. My
Okay.
daughter's Emma. She's 8. So I probably will pose the question to her in some way, shape, or form.
So Vincent, you want to learn about what relativity theory did with respect to limiting causation? You want to talk about that?
Right. I'm like, okay. He's obsessed with Ninja Turtles right now. So if
He's into what? Sorry.
Ninja Turtles.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So I'm sure I could pull out something from that universe and bring it to
Hey, they're in
right.
quantum reality, just like everybody else.
Right.
They probably make use of entanglement and other non-physical influences in their ninja selves.
And there, again, the free will thing, to trickle into, I guess, multiverses, right? Where there's
Yeah.
unlimited potential of existences. Like, I took a phone call from a friend the other day, and I wasn't expecting it to be this friend. And the first thing I said was, "Oh, is this a butt dial?" And he's like, "No." And then it led to a full conversation about something, something that he even said, "I have no idea why I called you. I felt inclined to reach out." And it opened up a whole new world of conversation, which then I said, like, this conversation now opened up a new doorway in some universe, perhaps this one, that is now multiplying over and over again, which is now creating a whole new version of reality or potential realities that we potentially could tap into.
Well, if we do another show like you suggested earlier, we'll have to talk about the many worlds interpretation of quantum theory, where we're springing off worlds every moment, and ourself and every possible thing, every possible outcome is going off into another world 5,000 times a second per individual. So that'll blow your mind a little bit. This is one of the respected top theories of quantum reality and how things work.
Hey guys, if you're enjoying the podcast, do me a solid. Subscribe, rate, and review. And of course, spread the word, tell a friend, click the notification buttons, do all that good stuff. It is greatly, greatly appreciated. But there is that reality in your own state of being, right? There is that reality in what you're feeling in a moment. So if you're able to tap into a feeling, like, and Joe Dispenza kind of talks about, feelings really being such a gateway almost, where if you're able to tap into the feeling, maybe that is a feeling that you're extrapolating from another universe, another version of you that is a better version of you or the highest version of yourself. So if you're able to tap into those feelings are existing in some strange, unexplainable way, but they're still in existence because you're able to relate to them in this version of reality.
It's funny, I'm sort of split on the whole multiverse thing. On the one hand, we need evidence for it, and there's no evidence for it. And I'm kind of a evidence kind of guy in that sense. On the other hand, we can't be too homocentric, where we thought
Right.
the thing evolved around the earth. And it may be that just clamping down and saying, no, we're the only universe is sort of putting ourselves in a backhanded, egotistical way at the center of everything. So those are my two twin poles. And by the way, most of my friends say one of you is quite enough, and we're telling you that because we're your friend. But it'll be fun to talk about the many worlds interpretation of quantum physics. If we continue this conversation, it's pretty wild. And there are people who say that's just the most ridiculous theory in the world. And then you have these ever pronounced about anything. It's such a ridiculous theory. And then you have these acclaimed physicists who are going, yep, this is many worlds. This is the way it all works. It solves all the problems that quantum theory has thrown out there.
But isn't searching or needing evidence to explain it part of the problem? Because you can go that way with anything. You can go that way with, I need evidence to believe in God. Like, that's where faith does come into play with many of these theories or thought philosophies, because there is almost this that's a very humanistic need to have, right? That's like, the old Bible was like, walk in faith, right? So if you're going to believe in God, but believe in God with faith. Don't believe in it because you need evidence, and calling out God, right? Or whatever your version of God is, or needing evidence of these multiple universes is almost blasphemy to those universes, because they are already in existence, and you needing the evidence just proves how human you are.
Well, in the scientific domain,
well, yes, a different domain, but for sure.
And that's where quantum many worlds, that's a theory within the scientific domain, trying to explain how reality works and what really is the is behind the behavior. Then you have to have some standards of some sort. You have to have some ideas of what qualifies as evidence. Because it's a way of looking at the world and predicting it. So in the scientific domain, I think it's fair to ask for evidence and to rate the quality of evidence and the criteria for evidence. I mean, that's what science is. If you want to get outside the scientific domain, then I think what you're saying is fine. You don't need evidence. It's not a scientific inquiry. It may nevertheless be an inquiry about what the world is, but not from the standpoint of scientific methodology. Now you're outside with a different kind of evidence or no evidence.
Yeah, but going back to the earlier point, maybe you need to step outside the science to see the science.
That is something we could discuss for a while. But if you're in science, you have to play by the rules. Now you could say, well, what are the rules? And that's changing. And we can get into that. But, that was my theory of physics in 500 years. What are they going to look back and see? Our science is going to be, voodoo. It's going to be, superstitious or something. And it isn't going to be science at that point in time. So you could go with that too. What you think is scientific and what you think constitutes evidence is an evolving thing. And so that changes the paradigm shift. And now we're talking about a different world, and we're still within the scientific domain.
And we're still within the confines of determinism and free will.
And for the moment, yes, we are. I mean, I think one of the things I say in the book is, if you stand up there and you say the issue's resolved, you can't really say that. You stand up and say that science has determined that we're determined, no pun intended again. You can't say that, because that's not what science says. Science has a split decision about it in terms of quantum theory, and it's all over the place. So you can't really say that that's what science determines. So my point of view that I got to after many rewrites is that you can say we'll never know if we're determined. I think you can say, and we can talk about this, how you would go about determining free will based on evidence, but then you have to stay in the world of evidence. But a future paradigm may be needed to really put all the pieces together. And I really think that's where things come out. We're limited by our current framework, as I said it in the earlier part. So to say, to wrap up, what I'm trying to say is that so many people get up there on stage and say one thing or the other thing, but very few people say, we don't know yet. We don't have the science. We do know certain avenues we can't ever discover. the determinism side. We don't know what it's going to take to prove it on the free will side yet. And we may have to just await another, and it may turn out that there's a way of relating. I think I said this earlier, events together that don't involve determinism or free will, or involve them both in a way that doesn't compromise free will, the way compatibilism compromises free will. It really is the ability to choose otherwise. And in the midst of it, somehow the world of determinism and the mechanistic unfolding of causal events is going on at the same time. We can't reconcile those right now. Those are just as irreconcilable as quantum theory and relativity theory. They just don't fit together, but they might one day.
Is it that we can't compute it conceptually, or is it that we just can't compute it like through science and evidence?
Well, both, but I was talking about conceptually at that point. We don't have the paradigm that allows us to put together these opposing principles that don't go together.
Maybe they're just never supposed to go together.
Well, we don't have the paradigm to tell us that for sure.
That's true. That's true. Maybe it's just they're like we were talking about earlier, just the cosmic yin and yang that is throughout all things. And maybe this is just, it's just the rebels and the empire. It's just that these are just two polarizing, conflicting thoughts and ways of being that will never be able to cross-pollinate.
Right. So the big picture point I'm trying to make in the book is this is not a football game, and it's not about rooting for a football team. It's about trying to figure out how the world works, and it's not yet time to pick sides. People always think I'm a free will advocate, and I am in terms of my disposition and instinct. And I don't see any other way to square with how we go about things or how we experience things. But I don't think you can say that it's on either side at this point in time. I think the most honest answer has to be it's unresolved, whether it's scientific or conceptual or anything. It's just not resolved.
And that's
Now,
on all
we
accounts.
like to have football teams and we like there to be a winner. But this is a different game, and we don't always play the football game. This is a different game. It's a scientific game and the philosophical game of trying to figure out things. And there's a temptation to just pronounce that the game is over before it is.
Well, that's the beauty of both of these mindsets and these philosophies, is that they are potentially, and I'm drawn to things that are endless. I'm drawn to sensory deprivation and meditation and conversations like this, and jujitsu and all of these expressions of running, right? Where in theory these things are endless. They are endless. And I think that's such a beautiful metaphor for life, because as much as we think that we are confined within this game that we're playing of winners and losers and life and death, it is energetically, believe it or not, it is this endless unfolding process. And whether you believe in reincarnation or just whatever afterlife you believe in, it is an endless unfolding of the essence or the soul of the human, or expressed in human form. And that's why I'm so drawn to these types of conversations and the idea of free will and determinism. That's why I go back and forth. I'm like, well, I can understand how free will really makes the most amount of sense. And I'm like, yeah, but that just might be a predetermined thought.
We were talking earlier about whether you can, if you can't know if we're determined, whether you can ever know if there's free will. And I was thinking about it because it's sort of a tough question, but in a way it comes down to the aliens controlling us question. No matter what experience we might have, let's say we have these experiences where, I'm not sure if you want to continue with this, but if you do,
No.
You could have experiences. We could have science map out to the quark what's going on, and we will, let's say, record the fact that we can go one direction or another with absolutely everything the same. How you would get it all the same in a world that keeps varying and so forth is another thing. But let's say it could be isolable to a degree where scientific methodology could say, if you can go one or the other way under this condition, and everything is otherwise physically equal, then it's coming from your will. So let's say we get to that point. Determinists can still say we're controlled by aliens. It's just, if you allow that kind of thinking into the world, that we can give credence, possible credence, which is some sort of credence to something that's absolutely impossible to determine, then you can't determine the opposite. And so we're back to the aliens. We have a lot of evidence for free will. We have evidence of a mechanistic system in the physical realm. We have a lot of evidence that it doesn't work in the mental realm. There's a lot of evidence that says it doesn't even work in the physical realm, and that's some of the quantum stuff we talked about in the entanglement. But if you let in the idea that we're going to talk about, forget all that, this is what could be happening, and postulate that there's this mirror world where we're puppets on a string and there's a version of us, and we're like in a little zoo, and Star Trek or Star Wars, whatever, all this kind of science fiction stuff. Everything can be falsified, but it doesn't mean there's anything grounded. And I think that's what I'm trying to get at, or what Popper's trying to get at with the idea of it. If you can't prove it wrong, you're really in science fiction land. If there's no reason to believe it whatsoever, you're in science fiction land. Now, determinists will say, but there is reason to believe it. There's, causes, and we see them. And how could this be any different? And how could we do something that the position of the quarks in our brain will not let us do? How could we do that? But all that stuff can be taken apart. And I try and do a fair job of that in the book. And obviously, I'm not the only one I'm standing on the shoulders of other people who are much more brilliant in every way than I am. But if you let that in, where do you go from there? Okay, we're being controlled by aliens. Okay, there's a big us, and we're experimenting, with whatever. Or here's one that's not falsifiable. These worlds are splitting apart 5,000 times a second every time there's an outcome, and every time we do something, and every time we observe something. Talk about science fiction. I'm not a fan of the many worlds theory. And it's like amazing that these really smart scientists are. And with a straight face, they say, oh, yeah, 5,000 times. Use every second, 5,000 U's are springing up with worlds. And this is every person in every universe. I thought about the other day. Oh, I actually put it in the book. It's like, well, if that's really true, then there's universes springing up where there's no free will, and universes springing up where there is free will. That's pretty weird. How does many worlds theory deal with that one? Yeah, in this world, there's a many worlds theory, but this is one of a billion worlds, and they're all possible. And they all manifest. All those worlds manifest. That's the many worlds theory. They're all happening. They're all real. You're deciding something now to hang up, not hang up, do this and that. Many yous are deciding every possible version of that.
Hello, friends. How are you? Just want to take a quick, brief break from the podcast, talk about a piece of gear that I've been rocking nonstop, and that's Wowie shorts. WowieLife.com, the Nomad 2.0s. They are super diverse. They're super comfortable. They've got this unique little stylish trim on the pocket, different on each color. I got them in green. I got them in blue. The black are in the laundry. They come with a lining, so you don't have to waste a pair of underwear, which is huge. I wear them to jiu-jitsu. I wear them on the trail. I wear them to the beach. I wear them out to dinner. They're super diverse. They're super comfortable. They're family-owned, which is always awesome. And they just released a new pair of sweatpants called the Ramblers and the Flow, which they are so dope. I can't get enough of them. I wear them all the time. They're pretty much the only pair of shorts I'm rocking these days. And for listeners of this podcast, you can get 15% off of your entire purchase with the promo code VBShow. So head on over to wowilife.com, grab yourself a pair of the Nomad 2.0s. Those are my personal favorite, and you will not regret it. Check them out, wowilife.com. Now back to the show. But it's kind of like it's kind of like when you're shooting an arrow to the target. If you yes, it's this linear path, right? But as you slice down the distance, you could really get very granular with the spacing, right? So in the sense that, yeah, you're looking at it as this long-term trajectory of existence, but if you start to divide that time or that distance, you can, I mean, it's
You never get
unlimited,
there.
right? It's unlimited.
Exactly.
You'll never leave the bow, you know,
Yeah.
and that's the possibility that actually does exist, but we're just seeing it play out in this one version of it, you know. So there, to me, I think that, and again, goes back to that point of the feeling that you could tap into of this best version of you, and who is the even you that you're referring to, right? There's like there was this moment when early in COVID where I was doing yoga every morning, and I had this moment where in my head a version of me, whoever or whatever it was, said to me, "You're embarrassing yourself." Now it's 4 a.m. my whole family's asleep. I'm like shaking because I'm not a yogi, right? But I stopped in that moment. I thought to myself, well, first off, who am I embarrassing myself in front of? There's nobody here. Everyone's asleep. And who is the you that's saying you are embarrassing yourself? Because that's me. So is there another version of me that's talking to me from a higher self, another alternate reality, you know, whatever it may be? Is that God? Is that just my own fear? Is it a dark energy? Is it a light energy? There are all these possibilities to who the you that's speaking inside your own head is who is speaking.
And there are also places you can check yourself in for that kind of a thing.
Yeah. I choose not to.
It's another version of, I think, what we've been talking about. It's a theme that has been emerging in this discussion for me, is that the world is mysterious. It really is mysterious.
Wonderfully mysterious, though. Wonderfully, beautifully mysterious. And I think one thing that I'm taking from, and I think it's a really important point that you are making, is that if you add a deterministic approach to life, and it may be okay on an individual basis, but if it becomes the drum that you beat out in the streets, and that becomes the mindset of a culture, therein lies the problem, in which where determinism is something that allows people to behave and act in a way that is not, you want to call it socially acceptable, whatever term you want to put on it, but it gives them an out, an excuse that is beyond themselves. And therein lies part of the problem on a cultural front.
Yeah. And look what totalitarianism tries to do. You're wearing the same uniform, you're following orders, you're being turned into a cog in a machine. Right? You got to think this is the leader, this is the cause. You don't believe that, you're gone. You're a little cog in a big machine and you have no personal identity. That's totalitarian tactics.
Yeah, but that's the world that so many people live in.
Yeah.
And maybe not in a sense of they're wearing the same uniform, but to some degree they are. You know, you go to anybody's 9-to-5 job, they're living a version of that existence. Or you go to certain schools, or you go to certain areas, you know, they are all just cookie cutter versions of each other.
Yeah. Lest I get sued again, I need to say the obvious, and I'm just kidding. The type of people that I'm talking about in the intellectual forum, Harris and all the others, these are stand-up, moral, decent people. I'm not implying anything about antisocial behavior with the tests they've done, and I'm not implying there's any totalitarian. I mean, they're stand-up and decent and moral, and These are good people. So that's not what I'm saying at all, lest it be misconstrued.
Well, I think that would be the only way that someone would perceive that you're saying that or implying that. I think it's just the sheer fact that you have to, it's again, goes back to the earlier point. It's just a matter of your perspective.
Yeah. I just don't want
It
to
doesn't
be.
make, it doesn't make you a bad person if you think that the world is determined by aliens. It doesn't make you a bad person if you think the world is flat. You know, it may not make
No.
sense to a lot of people. I may not agree with you, but it's no different than an expression of religion.
Well, as I say, it's a compassionate viewpoint when it comes to criminal justice, right? People are, to a larger degree, products of their environment, and they can't be held fully accountable. We have to have compassion. Again, it's a degree, but that's where that's leaning. And all the determinists I've talked about are decent stand-up people, and they're determinists. So, uh, but I was going to say, it depends on the context. When you're talking about big picture context, are we victims? Or are we not? Are we leading lives where we're utterly powerless and we're watching a motion picture screen and can't do anything about it? Or are we interacting with the world and shaping the way things go within all kinds of constraints and limits and cultural boundaries? And that's the big question of it. Because if we are biochemical robots, then we're victims. And this is what people have to understand about determinism. If we don't have free will, we are victims to whatever's running the universe, which isn't us. And our thoughts aren't ours, our actions aren't ours, our cares, our concerns, our tastes, none of it's ours. It's a disempowering kind of a vision of the world. And it's not presented that way. What happens is, and I go into the book quite a bit on something called free will speak. I take that from the Orwell expression, obviously, and the pictures that's painted of a predetermined world by determinists keeps borrowing free will language, and it's talked about in a way that it isn't really possible that it is consistent with a machine functioning world. And so it's presented like a Disneyland version of causation, where we can make choices. Harris says in the book, we can choose who we want to be, or we can improve our lives, is one of the actual things he says. You can't do that under determinism. You can't remotely do anything like that. You can say that predetermined causes can make us think we're improving our lives, can make us act like we're improving our lives, but our lives are predestined. You ain't improving anything. So this is free will speak. Determinists constantly frame a causal reality as if it were peopled with free will activities. And it's not what it is. And it shouldn't be presented that way. It should be presented as what it is. It's we're disempowered and we don't control anything and we can't improve our lives and we can't change anything. I take apart a whole bunch, you may not have read there, but I take a bunch of statements that he makes, again, representative. I actually take some other people too, of impossible things to say if we're living in causal reality. The determinists will just switch modes and say, and import free will values and free will language and imply free will activities. You can't do them both. And that's why I emphasize that it's a world of victimhood and powerlessness, because it's presented in a very propagandistic way. And I have a chapter going through all the ways that it's typically done.
I think on the individual sense, if you feel that way within the confines of your own home, that's okay. And I'm putting quotes around there, okay. But again, as a culture, if that starts to seep its way into the mindset of a culture, therein lies the problem. But then if you go bigger picture than that, and if you believe that as a religion, and I'm putting air quotes around religion, or a mindset or a philosophy, then it's like, okay, well, that's just what you believe in. So it's really the implementation of the determinism and how it is being presented to a larger group rather than the individual or the largest group, which is the universe. But when it's expressed in a culture, therein lies the kind of tricky, slippery slope that, semantics now comes into play, and you're implementing these possibilities of free will, but you're kind of a wolf in sheep's clothing almost.
Well, take it back to a personal situation. You said earlier, I'm just the way I am. I'm just the way I am. And let's say you say it in that sense, not in the sense of, yeah, that's just the way I am. It's a hard thing to recover from. But let's say it in the sense of, whatever.
Right.
Don't look at me, just the way I am. That takes it home personally from the cosmos into just
Your
real
interaction.
situations out there in the world. Yeah.
Right.
And there's another one. You encounter people who say, I can't do it. Now, if you had a dime for everybody who says you can't do it, when clearly they can do it, right? What they really mean is they don't want to do it for any number of reasons.
Or they haven't done it yet.
Not. Yeah, but they put it in mechanical deterministic terms. I can't do it. We can't share that information with you. It's like, sure you can. You could just fax it to me. Fax it. You could email it to me. Sure you could. People hide behind that, right? Because what it really is a decision. And talk about a wolf in sheep's clothing. No, we can't do that. That's procedure. Well, procedure is a wolf in sheep's clothing. Whoever made up the procedure could have made it up in another way. I'm not saying they had valid or invalid reasons, but it's talked about. It's the reverse of free will speak. It's talked about in determinist terms to hide the free will choices behind it. No, we can't do that. No, we don't do that for customers. Oh, okay. Really? Can't choose to do that? No, that's policy. So that's just the reverse of free will speak.
That's an interesting point, because you're when you reverse engineer it, there is this element of, okay, fine, if that's what's in place, but you can't say you can't, because you can, right? And and you could, if you press that button long enough, you'll find that most people do cave to the can.
Or they'll just say, okay, we're not going to do it. You become so pesty that they say, okay, you're right. We can choose not to do it. Now go away. We're not doing it.
Right. That's true too. But you're right. You hide behind.
It's like
you
the
hide
guy
behind
saying,
that.
Sorry.
You hide behind that. That's
like the guy.
That's an armor.
Just the way I am.
It's a coat of armor.
We can't do that. Yes, it's a coat of armor, and it masks our ability to the fact that it's not stepping up to the responsibility you have of making choices. I made that choice. I can't give it to you. I'm not going to give it to you. And there's several reasons why. And some I can share with you and some I can't. That might be a more enlightened way to put it. Or I can't share it with you at all. I can share it, but for various reasons that we think are valid, we have decided not to share it. It's a different dialogue.
Yeah, no, it's a very different dialogue, and one's empowering, and one is transparent, and the other one is elusive and disempowering. And I wonder where people make the choice for their way of being, whether it be free will or deterministic, in their own empowerment and disempowerment. Like the Sam Harris example, you're saying in one regard, Sam Harris, you're saying everything is predetermined, but you, who are very successful in your own right, are you alluding to the fact that you have no responsibility for that success, and that it has all been predetermined? Or did you actually have an effort and an impact into your, let's just say, your career? And then let's add in the element of relationships and love, and your love towards your children or your spouse, or any expression of love now becomes completely diluted Right, which to me, I think that's at the end of the day, I think that's what it all boils down to, as corny as that may sound. You know, that whole expression and experience of love and loving your children or your whatever it is all just a pre-programmed mindset, and it's not even really yours to feel.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's pretty sad.
Well, determinism would say he had nothing to do with his success. And he actually has a page or two on Ask Any Self-Made Man. I haven't focused on this argument, so I'm very loosely paraphrasing it. Ask any self-made man if they, are responsible for their success, and they'll tell you, all the factors that they didn't control. But again, it's confusing influence conditions with having no free will at all, and free will not being able to operate because it's absolute on the basis of adverse conditions that they rose above. And luck is a real part of it. We don't control luck, and luck is a big part of our life. And Harris rightly points out that it certainly is and should be factored into the penal system. But for the self-made man, I mean, he'll take the influences of their birth and their this and their that, benefits and deficits, and says, well, they didn't create their success. And it's true in the sense that they didn't create the conditions which may be more favorable than other people, and maybe not. That's a funny thing. I mean, people can rise from success from anywhere.
Sure.
Can't say, that you can make some generalizations, but that limits free will. No, it doesn't. It's conditions. And why does somebody rise from that free will, from that using free will from that adverse conditions, and somebody else doesn't? Well, you could say luck, you could say randomness, but it's not a very good explanation. They did things different. They had different personalities. And then if you say, well, all that's determined, then you're just arguing from a circular argument.
Right. And I think that's what it boils down to is, and again, I go back and forth in my own mind, so I'm not siding with one particular mindset or philosophy, but I think that at the end of the day, the determinism approach, or the philosophical idea behind determinism, does end with, well, that's just the way it is. Like that's just determinism. They have to, it's
Mm-hmm.
it all, you can always just default to that expression
Right.
of speech that says, well, that's what it is. And then you're almost at a standpoint, because you're like, well, how do I argue you just saying like, no, that's just not, it's my ball, I'm going inside. You're like, okay, I guess we're not playing anymore. You know what I mean? And that's where it gets really muddy.
It's a great example of free will speech. Harris says, talking right on what you said, let me see how he says it, that not having free will doesn't lead to resignation, right? You don't need to be depressed or resigned, because after all, everything's going to happen. Then he says, well, resignation is paraphrasing, resignation is a decision itself. What do you mean? What does that mean? And then he says, try and stay in bed all day and see if you don't get up and couldn't fight the urges to get up. Not it's so easy to stay in bed all day. So you say to yourself, wait a second, you're suggesting, rhetorically, that we have the ability, we could do that experiment. Well, who's making the decision to get in bed all day? Who's fighting the need to get up all day? Who's going to gain a lesson from this, that we don't need to be resigned? And how is being resigned a choice? See, it's free will speech. It immediately laps into all kinds of scenarios that only make sense if we have free will. That's the determinist.
Right.
Saying, don't be resigned because we're determined. The answer to that is, if he wants to be faithful to determinist principles, as well, we'll be resigned if that's what was determined back at the Big Bang 13.7 years ago. And we won't be resigned if that's we were determined not to be. So why are you suggesting, which is an effort to persuade somebody and change things, as we talked about earlier, everything he's saying in that scenario is violating determinist principles and presuming free will. And he's not the only one. I've got quotes some other, statured physicists and so forth who do the same thing. And that's full circle. That's why I want to emphasize where we began. It's a philosophy of disempowerment, but it's not presented that way by determinists.
Yeah, I think chalking it up to the Big Bang and having that be the finger that flicked the first domino is viable. And it's not to say the Big Bang didn't set things into effect, but did it set all things forever in existence that we'll ever experience into effect?
Mm-hmm.
You would think
it didn't.
You would think
We
that
know it didn't.
you would think that energy would fade off after some time.
Well, in some ways, I mean, it would still be a physical form, and
Sure.
that
It would,
part of it.
right.
Although who knows? Maybe in the future we'd start to shed that too. I mean, I don't know. Could be.
Right. As we transition
But
to pure consciousness.
Here's another odd thing about determinists and determinism. The world isn't predetermined. It isn't. And I can prove it by what they say, which is that they admit random events into the universe. Now, random events are an event which didn't have to happen. It could have gone that way. It could have gone that way. It went that way because it was random. It went that way because it's random. Random events can't be, by definition, determined at the Big Bang, unless you want to dilute randomness and say it's a function of what we know, which is not what we mean by random. Certain, not in science, it isn't what we mean, and not what common sense mean. We mean it really is random. It didn't have to happen that way. Why did it happen that way as opposed to another way? That's the nature of random events. There's no reason why. So go back to the Big Bang. We got all this chain of causes going, and then there's a random event, right? Well, what happens after that random event? Well, if you're a determinist, you have to say that a new causal chain starts based on that random event. And that causal chain would have been different. There would have been a fork in the road, and had the random event been different. Now add all the random events up, right? They're moving the universe in a billion different directions that couldn't have been predetermined, because that's what random events do. They move them off in different directions because everything afterwards is based on the foundation of that random event. Weird, huh? And yet determinists don't say, unless they want to reduce randomness to knowledge, it's like, where did you get the idea that it was predetermined the second you let in random events, true random events, into the universe? Are you saying random events are determined? No, because you just said yes, events are random and events are determined. Predestination is out the door right there.
Yeah, the acknowledgement of anything that's random now just puts a kibosh on the predetermined element. So any type of acknowledgement of any one random event now takes the air out of the balloon that would be
the whole universe.
Right.
The whole universe balloon, actually.
Right. Well,
now,
yes.
That doesn't mean there's free will.
Correct.
It means that there's not a causal chain that's mechanical, and free will needs that causal chain to be disrupted. In the chapter on science, I pointed out that randomness is the first crack in the egg. Because once you admit that there's an event that's unconnected to the state of the universe, the prior state of the universe, hello, free will, come on in. Doesn't prove it, but it takes away the Newtonian causal chain idea. Now you got an event that just happens. It has no relationship to the past. Has some relationship because there's a context, but it didn't have to happen that way. Free will, that was a big stepping stone for free will, because without random events, you're gone. And without random events, you could be predetermined. So that's out the window. When we come back and do the science version, we could talk about some of that stuff in more detail.
I just want to add one more thing to that.
Yeah.
That random event that potentially transpires then would open up the potential reality that free will can then exist.
Yes, exactly right. It doesn't prove it, but it opens the door for events that
Would
aren't
transpire to be
probably,
free will.
yeah, they're not required by the prior state of the universe. Something new. You used the word novel earlier, I think, with regard to your child, little Vinny, that there was something novelty in watching him. And that's exactly what a random event is, and that's what free will is. Something new is coming into the universe that wasn't required to come into the universe.
David, this was a very beautiful conversation that when reading your book, I wondered to I really went back and forth of what I believe. And I think after this conversation, I still have that feeling, but I will say, I think the human element is the key component in all of this, and the cross pollination of both worlds is where we really do exist. And there is a bit of determinism, as you stated, with some conditions that we're predisposed to, if you will, but we do have the capacity to rise above of those conditions. So I really enjoyed the book. I'm still skimming through it. I read a lot of it, but I kind of took it in dosage. And thank you for writing it, man. This is really an interesting perspective of free will and determinism. I think you did a beautiful job of the actual structure of the book and the way the pages are formatted, and some of the questions you ask are very very depth and really got me thinking. So I really appreciate the work you're doing, and I look forward to another conversation with you.
Thanks very much. Thanks for the kind words.